From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Inside the Cover with Ted Ayers Expanded Edition.
In 2022, I read, enjoyed, and reviewed Michael J. Travis's first book, Celebrating Kansas Breweries. In fact, Michael was our very first guest here on the expanded edition of Inside the Cover. It therefore goes without saying that I was extremely excited when Michael called to advise me of the publication of his second book, Kansas Baseball. And I am happy to report that he has hit a home run. Kansas Baseball begins and ends in Wichita with a discussion of League 42, providing its history, goals, accomplishments, and struggles, including the heinous criminal desecration and theft of the Jackie Robinson statue, which, unfortunately, became an international news item. As Travis writes, League 42 and all it represents and honors is where the story must begin. In honor of Jackie, his 9 values: integrity, courage, excellence, commitment, citizenship, justice, persistence, determination, and teamwork are central to this book. In between those first and last chapters, Travis shares information that illustrates and illuminates the significant connections between the game of baseball and the state of Kansas. Based on his personal research and multiple interviews, he has unearthed wonderful and impactful stories that come to life with his writing. The baseball scouting report on Michael is no speed, weak arm, good glove, strong with the stick. The writing scouting report on Michael is as follows. Michael Travis writes with an infectious charm, sincerity, and enthusiasm, and with a demonstrable appreciation and excitement for the opportunity to research and write about Kansas and baseball. His longtime appreciation and love for the game of baseball shine through every page of the book. Now living in Lawrence, this native New Englander came to Kansas in 1993, and he has clearly fallen in love with his adopted state, and his feelings of joy and pride for Kansas also resonate throughout his writing. Tonight's book is Kansas Baseball by Michael J. Travis. It is now time to go inside the cover. Welcome back, Michael. It is so nice to have you with us again.
Thank you, Ted. I'm thrilled to be here. Let's talk baseball.
Let's talk some baseball, and that's a great way to start. Why baseball and Kansas?
Well, baseball because my earliest childhood memories connect me with the game. As you saw as you turned the first few pages of the book, I talk about and reminisce about the ball field that was centered on our driveway, which was our wiffle ball park. So really the story unfolds for me as a youngster, just loving the game. I had a Boston Red Sox team to follow that was not very good, but I loved every ball player on the team. In fact, mimicked a lot of their batting stances when I played wiffle ball. But to me, baseball was a connection with my dad, my brothers, my mom, and my sister. But it just, it hits the heart. It's in the blood, and it has been since day one when I first picked up, a baseball in my glove and tried out for a Little League team.
Well, and that, to me, Michael, is one of the great, wonderful things about baseball is those family connections that many of us have. And like you, for me, it was my dad, and I had a number of uncles who were baseball fans, baseball players, and pretty much the consensus in my family was the St. Louis Cardinals. So certainly can identify with that background love that generated this book. But did you have any idea about Kansas baseball.
I did, but the lines became blurred pretty quickly. You know, I had a sense, you know, as far as an outline of where I thought I wanted to go, the stories that I knew about that I was kind of reconnecting with. But I think the beauty of this book journey has been that I've met great people along the way that have been doorkeepers, so to speak, and have opened doors to stories that I did not know about, did not anticipate. And as I, you know, unearthed the story, whether it was about someone that's no longer with us or a story about someone who's present, it was, you know, another oh my God moment. I need to share this story. So I think, you know, what I have found on the early part of this book journey with events is that there are so many more stories that could be told, you know, and I think that's the beauty of you know, writing the story, but also knowing that people are coming to me and sharing stories they have.
Well, and once again, our dialogue, it really seems to flow, Michael, because as you know, I recently finished this book about the Chicago Cubs by Rich Cohen. And in reading it, and of course, every baseball fan knows the double play combination of Tinker to Evers to Chance. Mm-hmm. Heard about it, knew about it pretty much forever. I did not know that Mr. Tinker was from Muscataw, Kansas.
Correct.
And we've also talked about Eldon Ocker, among others. When we talked about Tinker, you said, yes, I was aware, but wasn't able to work him in. How did you make those decisions about who you talk about and who you don't?
You know, I think, you know, for me, what I identified with and connected the most with, you know, just emotionally, were the defining moments of where I was going to go with the book. Joe Tinkers was on the radar. In fact, he was in my initial outline, a chapter. And I have a book that I bought about Joe that I did not crack because I had, as I said earlier, doorkeepers that opened doors to stories that I did not anticipate. So I think that's the beauty of it too. I had, you know, my journey kind of outlined, but the journey took some wonderful turns left and right that I think made the book richer.
Well, and one of the things I think is special about you, Michael, as a person and as a writer, is your rapport you develop with the people you're talking to. And that was very clear in your craft breweries book, how you made so many friendships. So I can certainly understand as you were going in the doors that were being opened for you, how that had to have been a roadmap for where you ended up.
Absolutely.
And I know from our prior discussions that you are a road warrior. Any idea how many miles that you put on your vehicle for this book?
Oh, I would say 20% of what I put on for the first book. You know,
and remind our audience how many miles that was.
5,000 miles. I decided that no story could be touched once when I was writing the beer book. So living in Lawrence, I didn't hesitate to drive to Dodge City, Hutchinson, areas like that with frequency. But with this book, I think it was more the number of pages I turned and the number of screens I looked at. And I'm saying that because there was so much more research involved in this book than with Celebrating Kansas Breweries. You know, and to me, I loved the opportunities in this book where I was able to meet people and have them basically help write the stories. But the beauty of and the joy of researching, I tried to find those nuggets, you know, like in Walter Johnson's story with his presidential tosses, where I'd find classic, beautiful writing from sports writers back in the day that I thought really put the kind of the heartbeat behind the page.
Why did League 42 resonate with you so clearly?
You know, I'm going to flip to a page. I think I'm just going to read something, and this is really where the connection came. So in my acknowledgments, I have a short paragraph, short sentence actually. To Lenny, Jim, Steve, Rusty, Frankie, Ann, Tony, Andy, Paul, Dave, Kevin, Joey, and Charlie, thank you for creating the great Sandlot baseball memories of our Little League days in Andover. So when I first...
And that's Andover, Massachusetts, by the way.
Yes, not Andover, Kansas. When I first ventured onto the fields at McAdams Park, all those guys and gals, Ann, Charlie, Tony, Frankie, they were there with me, and I could literally hear and almost feel us on the field through these new youngsters that we're taking the
That's
field.
wonderful. Yeah.
You know, just the chants were the same. The calls from the dugout from the coach, you know, brought me right back into time. So League 42 to me, you know, is the starting point for this book, because those who love baseball, that's really where it starts, in your childhood. And I thought it was important to ground us and remind us of why we love baseball as much as we do. It's because of those childhood memories, and it's because of the opportunity, whether you're watching a son, a daughter, grandson, granddaughter, you know, there's so much joy in being, you know, leaning against a chain link fence and watching a ball game unfold.
Yeah, exactly. It
There's
really does resonate. And by the way, did you see that Bob Lutz has been voted into the Kansas Sports Hall of Fame?
Well deserved. You know, it's well deserved. I fell in love with the story about League 42. I love everything that Bob and all his volunteers and his organization are doing. It's more than a game, as far as, you know, the way Bob views League 42.
It is more than a game. It is a social phenomena, really. And of course, Bob is also a Cardinals fan. Were you familiar with Jackie Robinson values prior to getting into the book?
Not as deeply as I am today. I have been drawn to Jackie since I became a baseball fan. But when I first walked into McAdams Park and into the pavilion where the new Jackie Robinson statue now stands proudly, I was drawn to the banners that surround Jackie's statue. And the banners all tie to the 9 values. And it just reinforced, I think, the importance and the beauty of what Jackie did. You know, again, it was more than the game that he was involved in. I mean, it was life-changing.
Well, it was for our country. It was, and well, it's clearly one of the most significant things to take place in this country, and amazingly, on a baseball diamond.
Yes.
Michael, the book has 12 chapters, and there is so much information in every chapter. Are they presented in a particular way?
I would say that's a great question, Ted. I did not want to make the book chronological. So, you know, I knew as I really started connecting the common thread, you know, that braided cord through the entire book, that it had to start and end with League 42. You know, and I thought, you know, the greatest Kansas ball player that we have was one of the first 5 inaugurated into the Hall of Fame. So Walter had to be early in the book. But, you know, as I kind of played out the cadence, you know, I have a chapter, as you know, about 3 wonderful women that were pioneers, or are pioneers, in the game of baseball. And it's a more contemporary story, but I wanted that really in the heart, the center of the book, because to me, having 2 daughters, their stories resonated with me, and I'm proud to see, you know, the trails they're blazing. So I did not want to go the normal way and make it just a historical mindset chronologically. I wanted to have a few surprises. The story, Ted, that initially kind of drew me into thinking about the Kansas baseball story is about someone, Bubba Starling, Derek Starling, who, you know, I think, you know, is, if not the best high school athlete we've ever seen in the state of Kansas, one of the tops. And his story was, I was just drawn to it because with Bubba, he came out of high school, you know, signed one of the largest contracts ever, and had 8 years of toil and pain. And, you know, it wasn't a glorious 8 years for him. Bubba accomplished so much in my mind, you know, and just in the journey itself. I mean, he refused to quit, although there were several times where he seriously thought about it. But he kept at it. It was a grind, and he finally had his, you know, his moment at the K.
Well, and again, determination, persistence.
Yes.
You know, there's so much to talk about, Michael, and time goes so quickly, but I wanted to follow up a little bit on Jackie Robinson because you have a chapter about African-American baseball players from Kansas. And why was that important?
Because these athletes, their story is integral to the story of baseball. And this is where I found a couple stories that I did not anticipate. Actually, that entire chapter, I would tell you, was a discovery through connections. In that chapter, I start with the Wichita Monrovians, who were a barnstorming black team back in the 1920s, who actually played a ball game at Ackerman Park, no longer here, but a great part of history in baseball in the city of Wichita. They played a Klan team, and they resoundingly beat them, which I was very pleased to unearth as I did my research. George Sweat, a kid from Humboldt,
I was thinking he was also from Humboldt.
Yes, 6 years Walter Johnson's junior, but they shared the same town. And George has a great story, and did some amazing things and kind of first offs for the Kansas City Monarchs. And then finally landing with Bobby Boyd, who is one of my favorite stories in the book. Bobby was he was a pioneer trailblazer as well. He was the first black to be signed by the Chicago White Sox. 5 years
from Kansas.
Yes, well, originally from Mississippi, but his roots came back to Wichita, where he played and won 3 championships in the NBC. And his family proudly lives here and celebrates what Bobby did, day in and day out. And I was very proud to be able to tell his story.
Well, it comes through in the book. You really connected with his family, daughter, granddaughter, I think, and that was really special.
Yes.
Now, I'd be remiss here that you have a chapter on Wichita State baseball. And of course, when you think Wichita State baseball, you think of Gene Stevenson. Tell us how that chapter developed.
Again, doors open for me, Ted. I had a breakfast with a coach that was a pitching coach under Gene for years. Gene recruited him to become a pitching coach when Brent Chemnitz was, I think, 21. And over breakfast and having an opportunity to meet Brent, a very colorful coach, he opened the doors to Gene by simply taking a selfie in the parking lot and sending it to Gene saying, "This guy's the real deal, give him some time." So I was really fortunate to be invited down to Gene's home and was greeted by Gene and Jana. Was a little intimidated.
Who is also baseball royalty,
Yes.
because she's the daughter of Dick Hauser of the
Yes.
Kansas City Royals.
So I was intimidated walking into their household. But after 5 hours of being immersed in conversation with Gene, with Coach, in his celebration of all things Wichita State University Shockers, I walked away, and I would tell you quite frankly, probably with the favorite story that I was able to put together, because what I saw in Coach Stevenson was a range of emotions, which I think are so indicative to the journey in baseball. Very few people that play the game are so blessed that they jump from high school or college straight into the bigs. I think seeing what Coach Stevenson went through from building a team that is historical today from ground zero, where he had nothing, was pretty remarkable.
It is. It's a great story. I'm so glad to learn that Gene has reconnected back with the university and is back supporting the Shockers, because the Shockers, I'd say this, Shockers and baseball are in Gene's heart. And so it's good to make that connection again. You have a chapter on women in baseball, and Alex Hugo, a woman who, starting in high school to college to in professional, has such a great connection with baseball. But I just love the photograph of her on page 81 of your book, where she's a Georgia Bulldog.
If I could interject real quick, I just want to do a quick aside on Alex. I know we're not going to delve too deeply into her, but for the listeners, Alex Hugo, who played softball at an All-American level and then became the captain of the USA Women's National Baseball Team and is a roving instructor for the Sacramento A's, she just announced, and that's part of this chapter about the women who are blazing the trails, there will be a professional women's baseball league in 2026.
Wow.
6 teams, Northeast centered, but Alex is hosting all the tryouts around the country.
Wow.
So, you know, I think
You've heard it here on Inside the Cover.
yes. So
That
keep
is
that in mind as you read the stories about these
That's
women.
exciting.
That Alex's journey and trajectory continue to just go towards the moon.
In your book, you mentioned 2 of my favorite authors, David Von Drele, who we've done his book here on our show, and Joe Posnanski, who's a great baseball writer. How did they become involved with you?
You know, it's a great story because that is one chapter that I landed with that I did not have on the radar, and shame on me. So I come from the book industry. I've been in the book industry the last couple of years, as you know, and had opportunities both to meet David Von Drele, who is a neighbor of Rainy Day Books in Fairway, Kansas.
Oh, okay.
And also had the opportunity to host Joe Posnanski 2 times for book events in Kansas City. And knowing, like you said, you know, their pedigree and their standing, they opened the doors or gave me a chance to kind of reach out and say, hey, take a look at my baseball outline. This is the book I'm going to go on. My journey with any comments. And they both came back in rather emotional fashion in a shared email and said, oh my God, you cannot write this book without a chapter about Bill James. And I was rather embarrassed because Bill James has been someone that has kind of shaped and influenced, you know, my thinking and my reading since the early 80s.
Well, and that gives me the opportunity because this book by Mr. Cohen that I referenced earlier, this is a quote, and he's mentions Bill James, the baseball historian, the man who invented the new stats that yielded the new understanding of the game. Now, to me, that not only is true, but very powerful. And I think I recall, Michael, you did not have the chance to interview James?
I did not. And, you know, what's striking, just had a recent event where I was meeting folks and, you know, again, having some great baseball conversations. And this, you know, young man, big baseball fan, came up and bought a book, and he said, you know, you wrote about Bill James. We just went to a KU baseball game with him. And part of me internally was like, oh my goodness, I would love to be able to, you know, have a chance to get in front of him. So no, I didn't. But I felt like I got to know him. There's a great biography about Bill that I just thoroughly enjoyed reading. And when you read Bill James's writing, it's like he's talking directly to you. You know, I'm a baseball nerd. I think you are as well. And you know, there's a classic. I want to share something with you, Ted, that to me just really kind of epitomizes Bill. You know, this is in his 1983 baseball abstract, which I've had since my college days. Hi, my name's Bill James, and I'm an eccentric. If you don't believe I'm an eccentric, just go to the library and look me up. The reason that I'm an eccentric is that I spend all of my time analyzing baseball games. Well, not all of my time. I have a wife to neglect. But most of all, my time. I count all kinds of stuff that lots of people are sort of interested in, but nobody in his right mind would actually bother to count. I devise theories to explain how things in baseball are connected to one another. Once a year, I gather all my notebooks together, translate the work that I've done into English, God knows what language it was in, lash it into some semblance of an organized pattern. I require the help of 2 editors to accomplish this, and give it to my wife. She types it up or something and sends it off to my publisher. This is called the baseball abstract.
Interesting.
So that really kind of captures his energy. You know, he's captivating. You know, when you kind
and
of
he lives in Lawrence, right?
He lives outside of Lawrence, but he went to KU, you know, and got 3 degrees.
Well, and we really cannot minimize the impact that this man had on baseball, certainly Major League Baseball. You know, you look at Billy Beane, I think, of the Athletics. There are certainly others. You mentioned some of the people who use his statistics as a part of their management of baseball, and it's really quite impressive.
Now, Ted, you've kind of called out the Cardinals twice, and I haven't had a chance to kind of throw back the Red Sox at you, but I do want to share, kind of tied to that. So Bill James was hired by John Henry, in 2003 to be an advisor to the Boston Red Sox. They won their first World Series.
Don't go there.
1 year later, and Bill had influence on some of the baseball decisions they
That
made
is
that
amazing.
impacted, the team. So, he changed the way a lot of people think about the game, and he proved that a lot of his ways of looking at the game could impact, smart baseball decisions, i.e., what happened with the Boston Red Sox.
Michael, time is out. Been a great conversation. I hope you know how much I enjoy talking to you about your books and certainly reading your books. So thanks again for being
Thank you.
back on Expanded Inside the Cover.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's another show, expanded edition of Inside the Cover. Tonight we've had the pleasure of meeting with Michael J. Travis to talk about his newest book, Kansas Baseball. I recommend it to you highly, and we look forward to our next opportunity to be with you again here on an expanded edition of Inside the Cover. Good night.